Welcome to Thrones Rewritten. Get ready for a thrilling Game of Thrones alternate history that shakes up the War of the Five Kings. What if Robb Stark, the king in the north, joined forces with Stannis Baratheon instead of Renly? Brace for epic battles, tense alliances, and the roar of direwolves and stags against the Lannister throne. If you're hooked on A Song of Ice and Fire and love reimagined tales, smash that subscribe button, like, and hit the bell for more. The fight for Westeros begins now. The winds howled across the Riverlands, carrying the scent of rain and iron. Robb Stark, the young wolf, stood atop a rise overlooking the camp of his bannermen. Tents stretched across the muddy fields, their banners snapping in the gale. Umber, Karstark, Mormont, and a dozen others, all sworn to the king in the north. His grey direwolf, Grey Wind, paced at his side, eyes gleaming like polished amber. Robb's breath misted in the chill air as he studied the horizon, where the fires of war burned unseen but ever-present. The news had come at dawn. Renly Baratheon was dead, slain in his own tent by a shadow that men whispered was born of sorcery. The Stormlands were in chaos, their lord splintering between Stannis Baratheon, the rightful heir, and the Lannisters, who held the Iron Throne through Joffrey's tainted claim. Robb's mother, Catelyn, had returned from her embassy to Renly's camp with grim tidings and a choice that could shape the fate of the North. "Stannis is iron," Catelyn had said, her voice steady despite the weariness in her eyes. "Hard, unyielding, but brittle. He will not bend, but he may break. Renly was loved, but Stannis is feared. If you treat with him, you must be steel, not wool." Robb had listened, his jaw tight. Renly had been a possibility. A charismatic king with a vast army, one who might have honored the North's independence in exchange for alliance. But Stannis was different. Stannis was duty incarnate, a man who claimed the Iron Throne by right of blood and law, not charm or conquest. And Stannis, unlike Renly, was still alive. Now, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Robb awaited the arrival of Stannis' envoy. The decision to parley had not been easy. His lords had argued fiercely in the War Council, Great John Umber bellowing for the North to stand alone, Rickard Karstark demanding vengeance for his sons, and Rose Bolton, ever quiet, suggesting caution with his cold, calculating gaze. But Robb had made his choice. The North could not fight the Lannisters alone forever, and Stannis, for all his rigidity, was no Joffrey. If they could forge an alliance, the Iron Throne might yet be toppled. A horn sounded in the distance, sharp and clear. Robb's hand rested on the hilt of his sword as he turned to his uncle, Edmure Tully, who stood at his side. "They are here," Edmure said, squinting into the dusk. "Let's hope this stag has sharper antlers than the last." Robb nodded, his expression unreadable. "Grey Wind, stay close." The direwolf's ears twitched, but he obeyed, falling into step as Robb descended the rise toward the camp's edge. The envoy was a small party, no more than a dozen men, their cloaks heavy with rain. At their head rode a knight in dark armor, his shield bearing the crowned stag of House Baratheon. Robb recognized him from Catelyn's descriptions. Sir Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, a low-born smuggler raised to knighthood by Stannis' hand. His weathered face was grim but honest, and his eyes held a quiet resolve as he dismounted and bowed. "Lord Stark," Davos said, his voice rough as the sea, "I bring word from Stannis Baratheon, the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. He bids you welcome and seeks parley under the banner of truce." Robb studied the man, noting the missing fingers on his left hand. A punishment from Stannis himself, Catelyn had said, for past crimes. Yet Davos served loyally. That spoke of Stannis' character, for better or worse. "I am no lord," Robb said, his voice carrying over the wind. "I am the king in the north, chosen by my people, but I will hear your king's words. Come, Sir Davos, my tent awaits." The camp stirred as Robb led the envoy through its heart. Northmen watched from their fires, hands on axes and swords, their murmurs a low rumble. Stannis' men kept their heads high, but Robb saw the tension in their shoulders. They were far from home, surrounded by wolves. Inside Robb's tent, a brazier cast flickering light across the gathered lords. Great John Umber loomed like a bear, his massive frame dwarfing the others. Rickard Karstark's eyes burned with a barely concealed anger, while Rose Bolton sat apart, his pale fingers steepled. Catelyn stood at Robb's right, her presence a quiet anchor. Grey Wind settled at Robb's feet, his gaze fixed on Davos. "Speak, sir," Robb said, seating himself at the head of the table. "What does Stannis Baratheon offer the North?" Davos cleared his throat, unrolling a parchment sealed with black wax. King Stannis offers alliance, your grace. He knows your strength. Your victories at Oxcross and the Whispering Wood have shaken the Lannisters to their core. He proposes a pact. Join your forces to his, march south as one, and cast down the false King Joffrey. In return, he swears to recognize the North's sovereignty as a free and independent kingdom, once the Iron Throne is his. A murmur ran through the tent. Greatjon's fist slammed the table, making the cups jump. Sovereignty? Words are wind! What's to stop this Stannis from turning on us once he's got his crown? Davos met the Greyjon's glare without flinching. King Stannis is no oath-breaker, my lord. His word is iron. He has no love for the Lannisters, nor for deceit. He seeks justice, not conquest. Justice? Rickard Karstark spat. Where was Stannis' justice when my sons died fighting the Lannister blades? He sat on Dragonstone, brooding while we bled. Enough, Robb said, his voice cutting through the tension. He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto Davos. Your king speaks of alliance, but what does he bring to it? Renly had 100,000 men. How many does Stannis command? Davos hesitated, choosing his words carefully. King Stannis' host is smaller, your grace. 10,000 perhaps, with the Stormlands in disarray. But he has ships, near 200, enough to challenge the Lannister fleet. And he has other strengths. Other strengths? Catelyn's voice was sharp. Speak plainly, sir. We've heard tales of shadows and red priestesses. What sorcery does Stannis wield? Davos's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. The Lady Melisandre serves the Lord of Light, and her god grants King Stannis power. I'll not deny it, but it is power aimed at our enemies, not our allies. The Lannisters fear it, as they should. The tent fell silent, the weight of Davos's words settling like ash. Robb felt Grey Wind's low growl vibrate through the floor. A warning. Sorcery was a blade with no hilt. Dangerous to wield, dangerous to trust. Yet the North was bleeding and winter was coming. Robb could not afford to dismiss any weapon, no matter how perilous. Tell your king this, Robb said at last. I will meet him face to face at Harrenhal. There we will speak of alliances and terms. But know this, Sir Davos. The North bends to no man. If Stannis seeks my aid, he must prove his worth. Not with promises, but with deeds. Davos bowed. I will carry your words, your grace. King Stannis will come to Harrenhal, and he will prove his claim. 3 days later, Robb's host marched south, a river of steel and fur flowing through the rain-soaked Riverlands. Harrenhal loomed on the horizon, its melted towers like the bones of some ancient beast. The castle had been taken from the Lannisters by Rose Bolton's cunning, and now it served as a stronghold for the North. It was a fitting place for a meeting of kings. Stannis arrived under a sky of iron gray, his fleet anchoring at salt pans to secure the coast. His army was smaller than Robb had expected, a grim host of Baratheon loyalists and sellswords, their banners frayed but proud. Stannis himself rode at their head, a tall, gaunt figure in black armor, his brow furrowed beneath a plain iron crown. At his side was the Red Priestess, Melisandre, her robes the color of blood, her eyes burning with an inner fire. Robb met them at Harrenhal's gates, his lords arrayed behind him. Grey Wind's hackles rose as Melisandre approached, her gaze lingering on the direwolf, as if peering into his soul. Stannis dismounted, his movements precise, and offered a curt nod. King Robb, Stannis said, his voice like stone grinding against stone. I am Stannis Baratheon, the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. You've called me here. Speak your terms. Robb held the older man's gaze unflinching. King Stannis, the North fights for its freedom, not for your throne. If we are to ally, I need more than words. I need men, ships, and a plan to break the Lannisters. What do you offer? Stannis' lips thinned, but he did not hesitate. My fleet will harry Blackwater Bay, cutting off King's Landing from the sea. My men will join yours in the field, striking at Tywin Lannister's host. And when the time comes, I will see Joffrey's head on a spike. In return, I ask your banners, your wolves, your bears, your flayed men. Swear to march with me, and the North will have its independence when I sit the Iron Throne. Robb's lords stirred, some nodding, others frowning. Greatjon's eyes gleamed with approval, but Rose Bolton's face remained unreadable. Catelyn stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. And what of this priestess, your grace? Her shadows killed Renly. Will they turn on us if we displease you? Melisandre's smile was a flicker of flame. The Lord of Light sees all, Lady Stark. His fire burns for the true king, and against his enemies. You need not fear, so long as you walk in his light. Enough, Stannis snapped, his patience fraying. I am no puppet of priests. My will is my own. Robb Stark, you've heard my offer. What say you? Robb glanced at Grey Wind, whose eyes were fixed on Stannis. The direwolf was still, but his presence was a reminder of the wild strength of the north. Robb took a breath, feeling the weight of his crown, a simple bronze circlet yet heavier than iron. I say we have a common enemy, Robb said. The Lannisters have bled my people and yours. I will ally with you, Stannis Baratheon, but on these terms. The north remains free, now and always. My men fight under my command, not yours. And your priestess keeps her shadows leashed. Stannis' jaw worked as if chewing the words. Then he nodded, a single sharp motion. Done. We march as allies. Tywin Lannister will learn what it means to face a true king. The pact was sealed with clasped hands, iron and bronze meeting in the shadow of Harrenhal. Robb felt the eyes of his lords, his mother, and the Red Priestess upon him. He had chosen a path, one that bound the wolf to the stag. Whether it led to victory or ruin, only the gods could say. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Robb and Stannis planned their campaign in Harrenhal's cavernous halls, their voices echoing off blackened stone. The Tywin Lannister's army was encamped at the Ruby Ford, guarding the crossroads to King's Landing. A direct assault would be costly, but Stannis' fleet could strike from the east, forcing Tywin to divide his forces. Robb proposed a feint, drawing Tywin's attention west with a series of raids, while Stannis' ships landed men at Duskendale to threaten the capital. It's bold, Stannis admitted, studying the map with a scowl. But Tywin is no fool. He'll smell the trap. Then we make him chase shadows, Robb said, tapping the map. My outriders will harry his supply lines, keep him guessing. When he moves, we strike. Stannis nodded, a rare glint of approval in his eyes. You've a head for war, Stark. Let's hope your heart is as steady. The alliance was not without friction. Stannis' men distrusted the Northmen, calling them savages, while Robb's bannermen grumbled about Stannis' cold demeanor and Melisandre's unsettling presence. Grey Wind prowled the camp, his growls a constant reminder of the North's wild heart, yet the two kings held their forces together, driven by a shared hatred of the Lannisters. One night as Robb walked the ramparts of Harrenhal, Catelyn joined him. The stars were hidden by clouds, and the air was thick with the promise of the rain. You have bound us to a hard man, she said quietly. Stannis will honor his word, but at what cost? His priestess sees things in her flames, things she does not share. Robb's hand tightened on the parapet. I don't trust her, mother, but I trust Stannis' hate for the Lannisters. For now, that's enough. Catelyn's eyes searched his face, seeing the boy beneath the king. Be careful, Robb. You're not just a king. You're my son. He nodded, but his gaze was distant, fixed on the dark horizon where the fires of war waited. The first test of the alliance came at the Battle of the Green Fork. Robb's outriders, led by Daisy Mormont, struck Tywin's supply trains, luring a Lannister vanguard into a trap. Stannis' sellswords under Sir Justin Massey joined the ambush, their heavy horse crashing into the Lannister flanks. The fighting was brutal, a chaos of mud and steel, but when the dust settled, the Lannister force was shattered, its survivors fleeing back to Tywin's camp. Robb stood on the battlefield, his sword red with blood, as Stannis rode up. The older king's face was grim, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. A good start, he said. Tywin will feel that blow. He'll feel more before we're done, Robb replied, wiping his blade clean. Grey Wind loped to his side, jaws stained crimson. As the allied host regrouped, word came from the east. Stannis' fleet had landed at Duskendale, seizing the town and threatening King's Landing's northern approaches. Tywin was caught, his army pinned between two fronts. For the first time, Robb allowed himself to hope. The Lannisters were faltering, and the north was rising. But in the shadows of Harrenhal, Melisandre watched, her flames whispering secrets only she could hear. And far to the south, in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister plotted, her golden son's throne trembling beneath the weight of coming war. The Riverlands burned. From the ruby-stained waters of the Green Fork to the blackened fields of the Trident, the war between the allied forces of Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon and the Lannister host raged without mercy. Harrenhal stood as a grim sentinel, its melted towers looming over the allied camp, where the banners of the direwolf and the crowned stag flew side by side. The victory at the Green Fork had bloodied Tywin Lannister's army, but the old line was far from broken. Reports from scouts painted a picture of a host regrouping, reinforced by sellswords from the Westerlands and levies from the Crownlands. Tywin was digging in at the Ruby Ford, daring his enemies to come to him. Robb Stark stood in the War Council chamber, a cavernous hall within Harrenhal's scorched walls, studying a map littered with carved wooden markers. His bannermen surrounded him, great in number, roaring for a frontal assault. Rickard Karstark, his voice cold with demands for vengeance, and Rose Bolton silent, his pale eyes unreadable. Stannis Baratheon stood opposite, his gaunt frame rigid, flanked by Sir Davos Seaworth and Sir Justin Massey. The air was thick with tension, the alliance holding but strained by mistrust and differing ambitions. "We cannot wait," Robb said, his voice steady but urgent. "Tywin's entrenching himself. Every day we delay, he grows stronger. We strike now while his men are shaken." Stannis' jaw tightened, his fingers drumming on the table. "A frontal assault is folly, Stark. Tywin's chosen his ground. High banks, narrow fords. He'll bleed us dry before we cross the river. My fleet at Duskendale is ready to move on King's Landing. Let Tywin chase us south, stretch his lines thin." "And leave the Riverlands to burn?" Edmure Tully snapped, his face flushed. "My people are dying, Baratheon. We can't abandon them to Lannister torches." Stannis' eyes narrowed, but before he could retort, Catelyn Stark spoke, her voice cutting through the rising tempers. "Both plans have merit, but neither is enough alone. Tywin is cunning. He'll anticipate a feint or a siege. We need to divide his attention, force him to react. Robb, your outriders can harry his flanks, keep him off balance. King Stannis, if your ships strike Blackwater Bay, Cersei will panic and demand Tywin's aid. That's when we hit the Ruby Ford." Robb nodded, his gaze flicking to Stannis. "Agreed, but we need more than raids and naval feints. Tywin's army outnumbers us. We need allies, lords who've not yet chosen a side." Stannis' lips thinned. The Vale remains silent, and Dorne nurses its grudges. The Tyrells are lost to us, wed to the Lannisters through Margaery. Who else is there? "The Freys," Rose Bolton said, his voice soft as a snake's hiss. All eyes turned to him. "Lord Walder Frey holds the twins, a choke point on the Trident. His men could tip the scales, if persuaded." Robb's stomach twisted. He remembered his mother's warnings about Walder Frey, a spiteful, grasping old man who cared for naught but his own gain. Yet the Freys commanded thousands, and their bridge was vital. "I'll send an envoy," Robb said, "but not to beg. Walder Frey will join us, or he'll face the consequences." "Send me," Catelyn offered, her tone resolute. "I've dealt with Frey before. He'll listen, if only out of fear." Robb hesitated, then nodded. "Go, mother, but take a strong escort. The roads are no longer safe." As the council dispersed, Stannis lingered, his gaze fixed on Robb. "You're bold, Stark, but boldness alone wins no wars. Tywin Lannister has ruled Westeros for decades. Underestimate him, and you'll find your crown on a spike." Robb met the older man's eyes unflinching. "I've beaten his son and his bannermen. I'll beat him too. But I need your ships, Stannis. Can you deliver?" Stannis' face was stone. "You'll have them, but mark my words. This war will not end at the Ruby Ford. The true battle lies in King's Landing." As Stannis departed, Robb felt Grey Wind's presence at his side, the direwolf's low growl a reminder of the wild strength that bound him to the north. The path ahead was treacherous, but the young wolf would not falter. Catelyn's journey to the twins was swift but perilous. Bandits roamed the Riverlands, and Lannister scouts prowled the woods. Her escort, led by Dacey Mormont and Smalljaw Number, carved through ambushes with steel and fury, but Catelyn's mind was on Walder Frey. The Lord of the Crossing was a vulture picking at the bones of stronger men. She would need all her wits to sway him. The twins loomed like twin sentinels, their stone walls bristling with archers. Walder Frey received her in his high hall, perched on his throne like a wizened spider. His sons and grandsons filled the room, their eyes greedy and suspicious. "Lady Stark," Walder wheezed, his voice dripping with mockery. "Come to beg old Walder's aid again, have you? Your boy's made himself a king, but kings need men, eh? And men need brides." Catelyn's spine stiffened, but she kept her tone even. "Lord Walder, my son offers alliance, not supplication. Join us, and you'll have a place in the new order. Lands, titles, gold. Refuse, and you'll face the wrath of the North and Stannis Baratheon combined." Walder cackled, his watery eyes glinting. "Wrath, is it? I've seen wrath before, my lady. Lannisters, Tullys, Baratheons, all the same. But I'm no fool to pick a losing side. Your boy's got spirit, I'll grant, but Tywin Lannister's got the gold and the swords. What's to stop me from throwing in with him?" Catelyn leaned forward, her voice cold as winter. "Tywin's gold won't save you when Robb's wolves and Stannis' ships come for your bridges. The North remembers, Lord Frey. And Stannis does not forgive. Choose wisely." The hall fell silent, the Freys exchanging uneasy glances. Walder's smirk faded, replaced by a calculating frown. After a long moment, he nodded. "Very well, Lady Stark. I'll give your boy my men. 5,000 foot and horse. But I want a marriage pact. My daughter Rosalind for your son's hand. A king needs a queen, eh?" Catelyn's heart sank, but she hid her dismay. Robb was unwed, and a marriage alliance might bind the Frey's loyalty, however fleetingly. "I will carry your terms to my son," she said. "But know this. Betray us, and the twins will burn." Walder's laughter followed her as she left, a sound that chilled her more than the wind. Back at Harrenhal, the allied host prepared for war. Stannis' fleet, under the command of Sir Imry Florent, sailed from Duskendale, harrying Lannister ships along Blackwater Bay. Robb's outriders, led by Brynden Tully and Dacey Mormont, struck at Tywin's supply lines, burning wagons and scattering scouts. The Ruby Ford became a no-man's land, its banks littered with the dead of both sides. But the alliance was fraying. Stannis' men whispered of Melisandre's rituals, fires that burned at midnight, shadows that moved without masters. The Northmen, superstitious and wary, kept their distance, their mistrust growing. Grey Wind prowled the camp, his hackles rising whenever the Red Priestess passed. Robb confronted Stannis in the war room, his patience worn thin. "Your priestess unsettles my men," Robb said, his voice low but firm. "Her fires and shadows are a blade with no hilt. If we're to fight as one, she must be restrained." Stannis' eyes flashed with anger, but his tone was controlled. "Melisandre serves the Lord of Light, and her God has granted me victories. You've seen the Lannister vanguard broken, their supplies dwindling. Do not question what you do not understand, Stark." "I understand war," Robb shot back, "and I understand men. My lords will not follow a king who consorts with sorcery. Keep her in check, or this alliance ends." Stannis' hand clenched into a fist, but he nodded curtly. "I will speak to her, but do not mistake my faith for weakness. We need her power to win." Robb said nothing, but Grey Wind's growl spoke for him. The direwolf's presence was a reminder that the North's strength lay in steel and loyalty, not flames and shadows. The Battle of the Ruby Ford came like a storm. Under a sky heavy with rain, Robb and Stannis launched their assault. The plan was intricate. Robb's cavalry, led by Great-Jon Umber and Rickard Karstark, would feign a crossing at the ford's western edge, drawing Tywin's attention. Meanwhile, Stannis' infantry, bolstered by Frey levies, would strike the eastern flank, where the river was shallower. Brynden Tully's archers would cover both forces, raining death from the southern bank. The battle began at dawn, the air thick with mist and the screams of horses. Robb rode at the head of his cavalry, Grey Wind loping beside him, his armor splashed with mud. The Lannister lines held firm, their pikemen forming a wall of steel. Tywin himself commanded from a rise, his golden armor gleaming, his banner a crimson lion on gold. "Forward!" Robb roared, his sword raised. The Northmen charged, their war cries shaking the earth. Arrows flew, men fell, and the river ran red. Greatjon's axe carved through Lannister ranks, while Rickard Karstark's sons avenged their fallen brothers with savage fury. But the Lannisters were disciplined, their lines bending but not breaking. On the eastern flank, Stannis' men fared better. The Frey levies, eager to prove their worth, fought with surprising ferocity, their spears driving back Lannister outriders. Sir Justin Massey led a wedge of heavy horse, smashing through a gap in the enemy lines. Stannis himself waded into the fray, his sword lightbringer glowing with an eerie red light. Whether it was sorcery or steel, the sight rallied his men, and the eastern ford began to crumble. Robb saw the shift and seized the moment. "Now!" he shouted, signaling Brynden Tully. A hail of arrows darkened the sky, striking the Lannister center. Robb's cavalry wheeled, abandoning the feint and charging the weakened eastern flank. Grey Wind leapt into the melee, his jaws snapping through armor and bone. The Lannister lines buckled, then broke, men fleeing into the river's churning waters. Tywin Lannister saw the tide turn. With a snarl, he ordered a retreat, his host falling back in good order to the northern bank. The allied forces pursued, cutting down stragglers, but Tywin's core army escaped, retreating toward the King's Road. The field was theirs, but the cost was high. Thousands lay dead, Northmen and Baratheon men alike. Robb walked the battlefield, his cloak heavy with blood, as Grey Wind sniffed the air, wary of unseen threats. Stannis approached, his armor dented but unbowed. "A victory," Stannis said, his voice flat. "But Tywin lives, and his army with him. This war is far from over." Robb nodded, his eyes scanning the carnage. "We've bloodied him. He'll not hold the Riverlands now, but King's Landing is his true strength. We need to march south." Stannis' gaze hardened. "Agreed. My fleet will clear the way, but we must move swiftly before Cersei rallies her allies." As the two kings planned their next move, a rider arrived from the twins. Catelyn's escort had returned, bearing grim news. Walder Frey was demanding Robb's betrothal to Rosalind be formalized immediately, or his men would abandon the cause. Worse, whispers reached Robb's ears of Rose Bolton's private meetings with Frey envoys, their contents unknown. Robb's heart sank. The alliance with Stannis had given him a chance at victory, but the Freys and Bolton were vipers in his midst. He summoned Catelyn and his closest lords to his tent, his mind racing. "Mother, what do you know of Bolton's dealings?" Robb asked, his voice low. Catelyn's face was pale. "Little, but enough to fear. Roose is loyal only to himself. If he's treating with Frey, it's to secure his own power. We must watch him closely." Greyjohn growled. "Watch him? I'll gut him if he's plotting betrayal." "No," Robb said sharply. "We need his men. For now, we play the game. I'll agree to Frey's terms, publicly, but I'll not wed until the war is won. Mother, send word to the twins. Stall them." Catelyn nodded, but her eyes were troubled. "And Melisandre?" "Her influence grows. I've seen her watching you, Robb. She sees something in you, something she wants." Robb's hand rested on Grey Wind's head, the direwolf's warmth grounding him. "Let her watch. I'm no pawn of gods or priests. We march for King's Landing, and we end this war." The allied host moved south, a river of steel flowing toward the capital. Stannis' fleet battered the Lannister navy, securing Blackwater Bay for a landing. Robb's outriders cleared the King's Road, driving off Lannister scouts. The Tyrells, bound to Joffrey by marriage, sent reinforcements, but their numbers were slowed by storms and broken roads. For the first time, the Iron Throne seemed within reach. But in the shadows, Melisandre's fires burned brighter. One night, as Robb slept in his tent, he dreamed of flames, a red inferno consuming a direwolf, its howls echoing into darkness. He woke with a start, Grey Wind's eyes glowing in the dark, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Outside, the camp was quiet, but Robb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The alliance held, but it was a fragile thing, balanced on a knife's edge. Tywin Lannister waited in the south, his army battered but unbroken. Walder Frey's loyalty hung by a thread, and Rose Bolton's silence was a storm waiting to break. And above it all, Melisandre's god whispered of fire and blood. Robb arose, his sword at his side, and stepped into the night. The war was far from over, and the young wolf would need all his strength to face the fires ahead. The Blackwater burned. Stannis Baratheon's fleet, a forest of masts and iron, choked the bay, their sails blackened by smoke and fire. The Lannister navy, caught unprepared, was reduced to smoldering wrecks, their crews fleeing or drowning in the churning waters. From the decks of Stannis' flagship, Fury, the Red Priestess Melisandre raised her arms, her voice a hymn to the Lord of Light as flames danced on the horizon. The allied host of Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon stood poised on the northern banks, their banners, direwolf and crowned stag, snapping in the wind. King's Landing lay before them, its walls bristling with scorpions and archers, its gates barred against the coming storm. Robb Stark rode at the head of his cavalry, Grey Wind loping at his side, his gray fur streaked with mud. The young wolf's face was grim, his blue eyes fixed on the city's towering walls. The march south from the Ruby Ford had been brutal. Skirmishes with Lannister outriders, ambushes in the King's Wood, and the ever-present threat of betrayal from within. Walder Frey's men had joined the host, their numbers bolstering the allied ranks, but their loyalty was as thin as a spider's thread. Roose Bolton's silence grew more ominous by the day, his pale eyes watching Robb like a hawk circling prey. And Melisandre's presence, her fires burning brighter with each victory, cast a shadow over the Northmen's hearts. Stannis rode beside Robb, his black armor unadorned save for the stag, emblazoned on his breastplate. His iron crown sat heavy on his brow, his jaw clenched as he surveyed the city. "The Lannisters are cornered," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "Cersei will fight to the last, but Tywin's army is broken. We take the city, and the Iron Throne is mine." Robb nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The victory at the Ruby Ford had weakened Tywin Lannister, forcing him to retreat to the Crownlands, but the old line was rallying. Scouts reported Tywin's hosts regrouping near Rosby, joined by Tyrell levies from the Reach. The Alliance had the upper hand, but time was slipping away. If King's Landing did not fall swiftly, Tywin would strike, and the war would drag on into winter. "We need to breach the walls," Robb said. "Your ships have cleared the bay, but Cersei's fortified the gates. We can't starve them out. Tywin's too close." Stannis' eyes narrowed. "My sappers are ready. We'll tunnel under the mud gate, collapse their defenses. Your men will lead the assault. Your wolves are fiercer than my sellswords." Robb's jaw tightened. The plan was sound, but it would cost lives. Northmen's lives. His bannermen, Greyjoy Umber and Rickard Karstark, chief among them, were eager for blood, but the toll of war weighed on him. He glanced at Grey Wind, whose amber eyes gleamed with feral intensity. The direwolf sensed the coming battle, and Robb drew strength from his presence. "Done," Robb said. "But we move tonight. Cersei won't expect a night assault." Stannis gave a curt nod. "Tonight, then. The Lord of Light will light our path." Robb's hand rested on his sword hilt, his unease growing. Melisandre's god was a stranger to the north, and her influence over Stannis was a crack in the Alliance's foundation. But for now, their enemies were the same. The Lannisters had to fall. As dust settled over the Blackwater, the allied host prepared for the assault. Stannis' sappers, guided by Sir Davos Seaworth's steady hand, worked in silence, their tunnels burrowing beneath the city's walls. Robb's Northmen sharpened their blades, their war cries muffled by the night. The Freys, under Sir Stevron Frey, formed the rear guard, their loyalty uncertain but their numbers vital. Roose Bolton commanded a reserve force, his men stationed on the northern flank, a decision Robb had made with reluctance. In the Allied camp, Catelyn Stark found her son donning his armor, the bronze crown of the north glinting in the torchlight. Her face was lined with worry, her voice soft but urgent. "Robb, you must be wary. Bolton's men are too quiet, and Frey's promises are as fleeting as mist. And Melisandre, her eyes follow you as if she sees something the rest of us cannot." Robb buckled his sword belt, his expression unreadable. "I know, Mother. Bolton's a snake, and Frey's a vulture. As for Melisandre, let her stare. I fight for the North, not her god. But we need them all to take the city." Catelyn's hand gripped his arm. "Promise me you'll stay close to Grey Wind. He's your shield, Robb. Trust him." Robb met her gaze, seeing the fear beneath her strength. "I promise. Stay with Uncle Edmure. If the battle turns, you'll need to rally the River Lords." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on him as he stepped into the night, Grey Wind at his heels. The assault began under a moonless sky. Stannis' sappers detonated their charges, and the mud gate collapsed in a roar of stone and dust. Robb's Northmen surged forward, Greyjoy Umber's bellow leading the charge. Arrows rained from the walls, but Brynden Tully's archers answered, their volleys silencing the defenders. Grey Wind leapt through the breach, his jaws tearing through gold-cloaked guardsmen. Robb followed, his sword a blur, cutting down men in crimson and gold. Inside the city, chaos reigned. The small folk fled, their screams drowned by the clash of steel. Stannis' men poured through the breach, Sir Justin Massey leading a wedge of heavy horse. The Kingsguard, led by Sir Meryn Trant, rallied at the Red Keep's gates, but they were outnumbered, their white cloaks stained with blood. Robb fought his way through the streets, Grey Wind a grey shadow at his side, until he reached the keep's outer courtyard. There he found Stannis, his sword lightbringer glowing with an unnatural red light. The older king's face was a mask of determination, his men chanting his name. "The throne is mine," Stannis said, his voice carrying over the din. "Push forward, Stark. Joffrey's within." Robb nodded, but a chill ran through him. Melisandre stood at Stannis' side, her eyes burning as she murmured prayers to her god. Grey Wind growled, his hackles rising, and Robb tightened his grip on his sword. The Red Keep loomed, its towers silhouetted against the flames consuming the city. The Allied forces breached the Keep's gates, their numbers overwhelming the defenders. Robb and Stannis fought side by side, their men carving a path to the throne room. Joffrey Baratheon, the boy king, sat on the Iron Throne, his golden hair disheveled, his face pale with terror. Cersei stood beside him, her emerald eyes blazing with defiance. The remaining Kingsguard formed a thin line, their swords drawn. "You're too late," Cersei spat, her voice venomous. "Tywin's coming. You'll all die." Stannis stepped forward, lightbringer raised. "Your son's reign ends tonight, Lady Lannister. Yield or die with him." Joffrey whimpered, but Cersei's lips curled into a sneer. "You'll burn, Baratheon. All of you." Before Stannis could strike, a horn sounded in the distance, low, urgent, and chilling. Robb's blood ran cold. "Tywin," he said, turning to Stannis. "He's here." Chaos erupted. Messengers burst into the throne room, their faces ashen. Tywin Lannister's army, reinforced by Tyrell cavalry, had struck the Allied rearguard. Roose Bolton's reserve force had vanished, and the Freys were retreating, their banners abandoned. The alliance was unraveling, betrayed from within. Robb's mind raced. "We need to hold the keep," he said. "If we lose the city now, it's over." Stannis' eyes blazed. "Agreed. Barricade the gates. We'll deal with Joffrey later." Robb sent runners to rally his men, but the tide was turning. The Lannister Tyrell host swept through the city, their numbers bolstered by fresh troops. Greyjoy held the mud gate, his axe a whirlwind, but Rickard Karstark fell at the Lion Gate, his sons dying beside him. Brynden Tully's archers fought from the rooftops, but they were being overrun. In the throne room, Robb confronted Stannis. "We can't hold the city. We need to retreat, regroup, and strike again." Stannis' face was a mask of fury. "Retreat? The throne is mine. I will not flee like a craven." "Then you'll die," Robb snapped. "And the North with you. Tywin's here, and Bolton's betrayed us. We need to live to fight another day." Melisandre's voice cut through the argument, sharp and otherworldly. "The Lord of Light demands sacrifice, your graces, blood for victory. Give me the boy king, and the flames will turn the tide." Robb's stomach churned. We're not butchers. Joffrey's a prisoner, not a sacrifice." Stannis hesitated, his hand tightening on Lightbringer. For a moment Robb feared he would agree with the priestess, but then he shook his head. "Stark's right. We retreat. But this is not the end." The Allied forces fought a desperate rearguard action, withdrawing through the city's northern gates. Grey Wind tore through Lannister pursuers, buying time for Robb's men to escape. Stannis' fleet covered their retreat, their ships bombarding the Lannister advance with wildfire. The small folk wailed as the city burned, their homes consumed by green flame. The Allied host regrouped in the Kingswood, a battered shadow of its former strength. Thousands were dead, and thousands more were missing, captured or deserted. Roose Bolton's betrayal was confirmed. He had struck a deal with Tywin, offering the North's plans in exchange for power. Walder Frey's men had fled at the first sign of defeat, their loyalty bought and sold like chattel. The Northmen cursed their names, but Robb's focus was on survival. In a clearing lit by flickering torches, Robb and Stannis faced their surviving lords. Greyjoy, blooded but unbowed, roared for vengeance. Sir Davos Seaworth, his face grim, urged caution. Catelyn, who had escaped with Edmure Tully's riverlords, stood at Robb's side, her eyes haunted but resolute. "We have lost the city," Robb said, his voice steady despite the weight of defeat. "But we're not broken. The North still stands, and Stannis' fleet holds the bay. We can strike again, but we need to rebuild." Stannis' fists clenched, his voice raw with anger. "Rebuild! The throne was in my grasp, Stark. Your caution cost us everything." "My caution?" Robb's temper flared. "Your priestess's shadows didn't win the day, Stannis, and your refusal to retreat nearly killed us all. If we're to fight on, we do it together, not as pawns of your god." The clearing fell silent, the tension palpable. Melisandre stepped forward, her robes glowing in the torchlight. "The Lord of Light has not abandoned you, your graces. The flames show a path. North to the wall, a greater war awaits, one that dwarfs this squabble for a chair of swords." Robb's eyes narrowed. "The wall? The Night's Watch fights wildlings, not Lannisters. What game are you playing, priestess?" Melisandre's smile was enigmatic. "No game, king in the north. A truth older than your gods. The night is coming, and only fire can hold it back." Stannis' gaze flickered to Melisandre, then back to Robb. "She speaks of visions, Stark. I've seen them too. Darkness, ice, death. If she's right, the Iron Throne is nothing compared to what's coming." Robb felt Grey Wind's growl vibrate through the ground, a warning. The North had its own tales of winter's wrath, of White Walkers in the long night, but the war with the Lannisters was here now, and his people were bleeding. "I'll not abandon my war for visions," he said, "but I'll send men to the wall to learn the truth. For now, we fight Tywin." Stannis nodded, a rare glimmer of respect in his eyes. "So be it. We march north, regroup, and strike when the time is right. Tywin will pay for this day." The alliance, battered but unbroken, turned north, their path uncertain. Robb sent riders to Winterfell, calling for reinforcements, and to the wall, seeking answers about Melisandre's visions. Catelyn took charge of the River Lords, her resolve a beacon for the weary. Grey Wind prowled the camp, his presence a reminder of the North's wild heart. Months passed, and the war entered a bitter stalemate. Tywin Lannister held King's Landing, his grip on the Iron Throne strengthened by the Tyrell alliance. Joffrey, still a prisoner in all but name, was paraded as a figurehead, while Cersei schemed and Tywin ruled. But the allied host grew stronger, bolstered by new levies from the north and Stormlands. Stannis' fleet raided the Crown Lands, keeping the Lannisters off balance, while Robb's outriders harried Tywin's supply lines. In the north, word came from the Wall. Jon Snow, Robb's bastard brother, reported stirrings beyond the ice. Wildling armies, strange shadows, and whispers of the dead walking. Robb sent Brynden Tully with 1,000 men to aid the Night's Watch, his heart heavy with foreboding. Melisandre's visions, it seemed, held some truth. One night, as the allied host camped in the Riverlands, Robb stood alone, staring at the stars. Grey Wind sat beside him, his breath misting in the chill air. The war had aged Robb, his boyish features hardened by loss and betrayal, yet he was still the king in the north, and his people looked to him for hope. Catelyn joined him, her cloak wrapped tight against the cold. "You've done what you could, Robb. The alliance holds and the north endures. That's more than most could have done." Robb's voice was quiet but firm. "It's not enough, Mother. Tywin's still out there, and Bolton's betrayal festers like a wound, and Melisandre. Her god's not mine, but I can't ignore her warnings." Catelyn's hand rested on his shoulder. "You're your father's son. Ned faced impossible choices, and he chose honor. You'll find your path, Robb, and Grey Wind will guide you." Robb looked at the direwolf, whose eyes gleamed like moons. "He always has." The war would continue, a grinding struggle of steel and fire. Tywin Lannister's cunning, Rose Bolton's treachery, and Melisandre's visions loomed over the allied host, threatening to tear it apart. But Robb Stark, the young wolf, and Stannis Baratheon and the Iron Stag stood together, their alliance forged in blood and tempered by defeat. The Iron Throne remained out of reach, but the north was free, and the stag's antlers were sharp. As winter crept closer, the true war, the war of ice and fire, stirred in the shadows, and the wolf and the stag, bound by necessity, would face it together, their fates entwined in a song of ice and fire. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you love diving into epic Star Wars stories and sci-fi adventures, check out my second YouTube channel, The Force Fiction. The link's in the description. Subscribe and join the journey.